Welcome to China Insider. Today we have four topics. We're going to first start with how a Dutch news agency's reporter in China was harassed and arrested for attempting to interview a bunch of protesters. And then later on, we'll talk about how vehicle hit and run in northern China hit over 40 students. And I'll save the details because of YouTube censorship. And then we'll also talk about the updated details on Angela Chao's death, now being ruled potentially for criminal investigation. And to finish it off with New York City Eric Adams' aide, whose name is Winnie Greco, how her home was raided by the FBI, potentially over ties with China. So let's get started. All right, so this first story here is very interesting. Now, I'll play the video. I won't play the audio because of YouTube copyright, but basically what's happened is this guy, his name is Schold Den Haas. He went to Sichuan where they're protesting over the Sichuan Trust. Now, Sichuan Trust since 2020 have basically been unable to pay people, the investors, to pay back the money that they've deposited for investment. And you see here, he gets pushed to the ground by this guy in purple. He basically gets his stuff taken away. He's trying to get it back. These people are plainclothes cops. So whenever there's a protest in China, they have the regular cops in uniforms, and they have these like onlookers or bystanders, right? But they're actually also cops. And so he tries to get his stuff back, and peculiar, but they block him off his cameraman's footage with umbrellas. They also use these like giant screens when there's protests and stuff like that. So this also happened with various other news media as well. CNN, their former reporter Selena Wang, when she was in the countryside, she was tailed by a car and by people. BBC, when they were interviewing people for the white paper protest in end of November of 2022, he was also arrested. So this is another journalist in China who is unable to fulfill his role as a reporter because, obviously China does not have press freedom. And so for him to be there and being arrested, it actually fits the current sort of climate in China, right? You cannot expose anything, especially when this is about something to do with the Chinese economy. Now, so let's talk about quickly the story of how this sort of all got started. Okay, so based on the Chinese reports, again, this is Chinese state media, so take it with a grain of salt. Since 2020, this Sichuan Trust has, let me translate this to English first, has basically been unable to pay people back. Now, according to the latest information, they claim 90% of the victims have signed contracts for repayment, but to exact how much amount, we're not so sure about it. And so clearly, if people, this story came out on February 27th, so clearly people are still struggling to get paid. But I think the issue is that like that protest is not a lot of people actually. If you look at it, there's maybe like a dozen people there. But the story has been ongoing since 2020. So since I think 2021, the regulators, they've taken control of Sichuan Trust, and they've been trying to sort of restructure the company to be able to pay back. Now, this is about 25 billion yuan to investors, right? So it's a huge amount of money that's essentially being pocketed. And now, if you don't know what trust is in China, it's basically called the Chinese shadow banking industry. It's where a lot of the fairly wealthy people send their money for investments, right? So there's a regular, investment, then there's shadow banking investment. And that's where sort of the richest of the rich play with their money. Now, this is also, again, according to Caixin, they're willing to offer about 40% to 80% compensations to investors. But again, the story with how China do these things, right, is there's government involved. They will basically pay compensation to like maybe a dozen people or maybe like 100 people out of thousands, right? And what that serves is a purpose of saying, hey, look, we, the government, fulfilled our duty to protect you, the investor. Not really, but that's how they're going to frame it as. You either take this new contractual plan of repayment, which I assume most people do because there's no other choice, where you're not going to get your full amount back, but you're going to get some money. It's enough because we technically paid you, but it's not enough because you still lost a lot, right? So, some people go and protest, but most people, if they don't end up taking that repayment, they might just end up with nothing because the government says, hey, look, I try to play fair for you. I try to play, the rules, try to judge the situation, and you're the one who's still not taking the sweet deal. So then that's your fault. So they start blaming you. And that happens with anything with, like earthquake or disaster victims, with any social event, right? It's usually the person that suffered, the victims, end up taking more losses compared to the person that's actually at fault here, which is the Sichuan Trust. So you're never going to get your full amount back. So that's the first story. All right, let's move on to our next. Now, this took place according to the internet information, is because a mental ill patient, after he was drunk or he took some sort of substance, he drove into a crowd of kids on their way after school, and this happened in Shandong province. So this is the video. Let me lower the audio a little bit. I will probably end up blurring this just so you guys know. Okay. Let me just describe the scene. It is very tragic. This guy, the road, it's along the school. So a lot of the information is suggesting that this took place in a residential area. It is true, but it's actually in front of the school. So to your right side here in this video is where the school is, and so this is the road next to the school, and there's trees on both sides. It is a car, so it's a regular road, so cars can drive through it. But as you can see, it's lined with students. Now the good thing is there are many people lining up to give blood at the local clinic to help out the kids, right? The latest information that we know of suggests it was at least 40 kids injured, including at least 10 or so that has passed away, unfortunately. Let me see here. So this is March 1st, so this was yesterday. At least there's still about 30 plus kids, students still in the local hospital receiving treatment. This is the video of him being caught. So the perpetrator is already in custody. I believe he has died actually after he was in custody shortly after. So as you can see the front of the car here, I don't know if it show it in the beginning here. It's already been damaged. So basically he intentionally did this, right? So there's no way to excuse his behavior. But the issue with China is you basically indiscriminately kill people just for the sake of trying to get back at society. But they would never, do this. Like they wouldn't run into a police station or the local government office and retaliate against those people, but they murder innocent people on the street, right? And since the New Year started, the Chinese New Year, of course, there's been 5 or 6 different mass murder cases, right? That has happened within a span of 2, 3 weeks. And we're talking about this China. You can't obviously own guns, right? We're talking about makeshift nail guns. We're talking about cars. We're talking about murders. Just there was recently a case with a man who held a cleaver. He went into a kindergarten and he indiscriminately, attacked kids and murdered kids. So this is happening like more frequently, right? So it's definitely a reflection of the bottom versus bottom, right? This people versus people struggle that's taking place in China because the economy is really bad, social resentment is at an all-time high, and there's clear misery that's just fueling a lot of these behaviors. And again, it's not to excuse any of that, but it is a reflection of what's happening in the Chinese society and is not going in the right direction. So different schools since this incident decided to basically force parents to sign these agreements saying that once the students leave the premise of the school, their safety and security is no longer the issue of the school. Now, I don't know about any other country. I know in the United States, you have school buses, you have after school, for example, where I am, there's people with the safety vests on the street with stop signs that they hold out to ensure that school kids, when they cross the pedestrian walk, that they're getting the safe, all the cars have to stop on both sides. When school buses stop, right, you have to respect that it's part of the law for you to also stop and respect the crossing or the just students getting off the bus in the United States. You don't have that in China, right? So there's now all the schools, what they're doing is to avoid further responsibilities. They're avoiding this entirely. They're saying that, well, the parents, you signed this agreement. If something happened to your kid outside of the school gate, that's no longer a problem. Don't come to us for an explanation. Or, in this case, if your kid is in the hospital or worse, their lives have ended, that's your problem. That's no longer us. That's not our problem. Now, some of these you can't really avoid, right? Because in China, you never know when something like this will take place. So it's a tragedy all around. This one here. Okay, so the police report comes out, says that 2 have died so far. And they're making it, they're basically minimizing the number of deaths because in China, now if this is a social situation or it's a natural disaster, if it is under, I believe it's either under 30 people or 10 people, I can't remember the exact number, it's considered a severe incident, right? That means the municipal government, the local government has to step in to investigate the cause of the incident. If it's above a certain number of people, I believe it's 30 above or higher, right? So if the number of people that have died, then it's considered a extremely severe case in which the provincial government, higher levels of the authority have to be involved. So to avoid causing a widespread social instability across the area, what they tend to do is to minimize the number of deaths, right? So they'll basically adjust the number, even though the real number of victims. Oh yeah, so here it says at least 40 in the hospital, 5 have already died. And so people are still lining up, as you can see in these videos, to donate blood. So it's still developing as in terms of what's been happening. So that's the story so far for this. Okay, on to our next topic, which is the update information on the death of the sister-in-law of Mitch McConnell, Angela Chao. Okay, so according to CNBC, who's written this report on February 29th, Angela Chao's death, right as of right now, is being considered for criminal investigation. Now, keep in mind, this happened on February 11th. Today is March 2nd. It has been like more than 2 weeks since the initial incident. And we're still not conclusive in terms of her cause of death. Okay, so the local county, so the county police and the county departments suggest that there was an unfortunate accident. But now the situation has been escalated where the Texas state trooper has taken over for the investigation, and they're still not excluding criminal activities involved in this particular case. It's something super fishy about her death, okay? After more than 2 weeks, you still can't rule out criminal activity. What that basically tells us is the chance of her being murdered is very high. Based on just this information, Kyle Bass, who has been giving us a lot of the information about this case, he has come out and he actually gave us a little bit more details. Okay, so this is Kyle Bass saying take 2 on the suspicious death of Angela Chao. Now a criminal investigation, as we've learned. He says it's a quantum leap from an unfortunate accident. So critical facts that it's not being focused on, which is the fact that Angela Chao's husband, Jim Breyer, his associated firm called IDG Capital was actually listed as a Chinese military company by the Pentagon just days before she passed away. And then he also he emphasizes that her role as on the board members of 2 of China's most important shipping as well as shipbuilding companies, which are tied to the Chinese military as well. They're sanctioned by the Biden administration, of course. You can't get on those without showing your allegiance to the CCP because, I mean, that's associated with the Chinese Navy, right? Super important. And perhaps the most important, as Kyle says here, is the fact that the initial investigation with Blanco County Sheriff's Department, they refused the assistance of the state level police to conduct this, right? Now, keep in mind, Blanco County, based on their own reports, they say that half of the rescue staff is made up of volunteers. So we can tell that their experience is not the most, sufficient when it comes to this type of stuff, whether that's the rescue or the criminal activity investigation. Now, so this makes it very interesting because we've now learned that the Texas Rangers believe there are still evidence. Now, of course, they're not going to release anything until the full investigation is done, fearing that it could cause trouble with their potential or possible prosecution. Right, so we're still waiting for that. So the story, again, it's not over, but it's very interesting because if you consider the aspects of the story, right, we've now learned that the ranch that she died on is now, based on the information that we've been covering in our previous videos, it actually belongs, or at least is tied to a firm that bought it under Jim Breyer's name, right? Because the corporation that they used was JWCB, which is tied to Jim Breyer. But Kyle Bass is saying that the ranch actually is used by Elaine Chao and Mitch McConnell. And you've probably seen the news that Mitch McConnell has announced that he's retiring from the Senate Minority Leader role for the Republican Party in the Senate in November. So what does Mitch have to do with the death of his sister-in-law that he needs to excuse himself out of the leadership role? Will he also be part of the investigation? We don't know. Now, I have to say this, right? The day that she died, Mitch McConnell was in Washington, D.C., so it's not like, he murdered her or anything like that. But the ranch that she died on is their own property, or at least it's part of their family's property. And I don't know much about whether or not buying a ranch, you can buy it under Jim Breyer's name and then be used for, gift it to Mitch or gift it to Elaine. Or maybe it was money that Mitch McConnell had and he just asked Jim Breyer to buy it for him. There's plenty of possibilities. But the question is, how did she die, right? That's still the question. Because the one thing that really bothered me and many people is the fact that, so this is an article from a Chinese state media called Caixin. This article came out the day after her death, right? So it says Chinese-American female shipping king Angie Zhao died in a car accident at the age of 50, okay? So At first, now they've since changed the details of the article, but at first they keep saying that her death was a traffic accident involving a tractor trailer or a semi truck, basically running a red light, and then she died in the traffic accident. But as we know, she actually drowned in a pond, so it doesn't make sense, right? But why is one of the top like Chinese state media is so keen on immediately jumping on this information, directing her death away from the pond, from the drowning, right? Something's fishy. So for me personally, I believe there's a huge amount of connection from the CCP to her death. But I can't conclusively say what it is right now, but I believe we'll find out more in the coming days. And I think that's the issue here. So, based on this, right, if we consider this, now Kyle Bass is still maintaining that the car she drowned in is a Tesla. But there again, that's really up to the Texas Rangers right now because they would have to determine the logs and the camera footage on the car if it is a Tesla. But we have no other ways to confirm whether or not that is indeed the car of the question. Um, so I think at the end of the day, where we're stuck on right now is how she died. Clearly, it wasn't suicide because she was actually fine just a few hours ago, according to one account, that she was talking to her friend and she seemed fine. But it also, we cannot rule out potentially of murder. So it really becomes the question of how did she back herself into a pond? Or how does she remain in the pond for so long? Knowing the fact that Teslas can actually float. If it was another car, then she still had some time to escape. So there's so much we don't know about this murder, but more than 2 weeks after the initial incident, we still have no idea. That should raise a lot of suspicion. And also something interesting too, right? Apparently, there's no autopsy done initially when she was found drowned in the pond. But of course, now that the Texas Ranger has taken over the investigation, we might find something from her autopsy. Was she intoxicated? Did she take drugs, or was there anything related to that? We need to know a lot of those information, which is not being made public. So that's the latest update on the death of Angela Chao. And it just kind of lines up with, Mitch McConnell resigning and a criminal investigation underway. Something's fishy, right? And all of this ties to the CCP because of her ties and her husband's tie to China. And that's not avoidable in terms of the discussion. So we'll have to see for more information to come. All right, for our last topic today, we're going to talk about the aide of New York City Mayor Eric Adams, Winnie Greco. She, or her Chinese name is Deng Qirong. Now, her home was raided by the FBI, actually on this is February 29th in the Bronx. Now, she's been a long time sort of aide slash, personal advisor, contributor to Eric Adams' campaign, actually donating money to his campaign, serving as his Asia advisor or Asian advisor or whatnot. But who exactly is Winnie Greco? So Winnie Greco has been the inner circle part of Eric Adams' team for a very long time, and but she actually has a big tie to the Chinese community in New York City, particularly to the Fujian province associated communities. Now that basically raises the question: is she tied to the CCP? Well, based on videos that we have so far. Now, for example, if you look at this video here, the one that's been highlighted is Winnie Greco in the video. And then somebody else that's very interesting is this person here. So the one in the circle. That guy, he was actually arrested for the New York City CCP police station, if you remember, Lu Jianwan. So basically, it means that appearing at these Chinese Communist Party events, Winnie Greco has to be involved with the CCP. And it turns out, actually, Winnie did pay for Eric Adams to go on an 11-day trip to China, in which she accompanied him in 2017, and they were even photographed meeting with local officials. The FBI office that raided her home on February 29th has been dealing a lot with the Chinese infiltration. So this again is a developing story, but I think it speaks to volume because remember we did a video on Christine Fung, right, the UK-based lawyer who actually donated to members of parliament. I'll link the video here if you haven't checked it out. So it seems like these women, they're using their access with top-level politicians. And remember, this is a mayoral level. This is municipal level of obviously, the mayor of New York City is a big role, right? It's much bigger than any other mayors across the country. But still, just them having somebody like Winnie Greco or somebody like Christine is very important because it's almost like they're planted next to the important figure so that they can have access to pro-China sort of policies and to help influence those politicians. Again, I'm not trying to say that Eric Adams is captured. in that sense, but it is raising suspicion because her home was raided and she apparently suffered a medical episode, her back pain or something during the raid. So, but anyways, so that's the story. We're probably seeing a very similar sort of situation how Christine Fung was found to be using money and just political influence to try to direct pro-China values out of these politicians. Winnie Greco is doing the exact same thing, but in New York City.